I'm 75 years old. Nothing in my body hurts. Not one joint grinds. Not one knee protests when I walk down the stairs in my house in Pittsburgh. This morning, before the sun came up over the river, I was already in the water, like every day. 11 years straight without a single break. You're going to hear me talk about swimming, and you'll think this is another one of those pieces of advice from a senior wellness magazine. It isn't. What I do every morning isn't exercise. It's a contract with my own skeleton, a brutal deal that nobody else can honor for me. And before I explain how it works, I need to tell you something no doctor ever told me. Resting a painful joint is the same as letting rust settle into a metal gear. Rust is not eliminated by rest. It's eliminated by movement, by controlled friction, by resistance, by cold water at 5 in the morning when everything in your body is screaming at you to stay in bed. My name is Raymond, and this is the story of how I stopped becoming a broken old man. At 62, I was a retired steelworker from Pittsburgh's North Side. 31 years in the mill. Your body takes it. It takes decades of it, but it doesn't forget. Everything you demand from it gets logged in the tendons, in the cartilage, in that gel that separates the bones and thins with the years like a tire tread that's run its miles. My knees started first, a grinding that became a burning that became a constant pain that was just there, always, like a low-frequency signal you can't turn off. Then the right shoulder, which stopped completing a full rotation one morning while I was trying to button a shirt. Then the left hip, which started negotiating every time I needed to get in or out of a truck. My daughter-in-law, Linda, who's a practical woman with no patience for sentiment, arrived one day with one of those power lift recliners. I laughed about it. 2 years later, it was the only chair I sat in. Not because it was comfortable, because it was the only place in the house I could stand up from without using both hands and making a sound that would make my grandson Tyler stop what he was doing and stare. The boy was 10. We were at a 4th of July cookout in the backyard, the kind with too many people and not enough shade. I dropped a paper plate. The movement I had to execute to pick it up was not a normal human movement anymore. It was a calculated procedure with preliminary positioning that still ended with a grunt that cut through the conversation at the nearest picnic table. Tyler looked at me, said nothing. But the look had something in it that a 10-year-old shouldn't have when he's watching his grandfather. The specific kind of quiet worry that comes before someone decides to lower their expectations of you. I had loaded steel billets in the mill that other men asked me to carry. Now I couldn't pick up a paper plate without announcing it to the whole backyard. The orthopedic specialist was thorough, professional, and completely useless in any practical sense. Bilateral knee cartilage loss, rotator cuff degeneration in the right shoulder, beginning degenerative changes in the left hip. He wrote a prescription with the practiced efficiency of someone who's done it 1,000 times. Anti-inflammatories, pain management referral, cortisone injection schedule. Then he said something that stuck in my throat like a bone. Mr. Raymond, at your age, some degree of chronic pain is to be expected. The goal is management, not elimination. Management. The goal is management. I walked out of that office and stood in the parking garage for a full minute before I could move. They weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to make the unfixable livable. Those are not the same thing. That night I didn't sleep. I lay there while my wife Dorothy slept beside me, and I went over those words. Management, not elimination. The entire proposition of modern medicine for a working man's body after 60 reduced to a single sentence. Accept the condition. Chemically suppress the signal. Keep moving at reduced capacity indefinitely. The next morning I filled the prescription, drove home, and set the bottle on the kitchen counter. I stood there looking at it, that ordinary orange prescription bottle. It sat there representing a decision I hadn't technically made yet, but could feel being made for me. From this day forward, your mobility is a pharmaceutical subscription. I picked it up, walked to the trash can, dropped it in, stood there for a moment, walked out to find a pool. What I found was the community center pool on Federal Street, with flickering fluorescent lights and water that smelled like it was mostly chlorine and ambition. First morning, 5:15 a.m. The water hit me like a closed fist. My knees complained from the first stroke. My right shoulder refused to complete a full pull cycle for the first 25 minutes. I swam 140 yards in about 23 minutes. I got out of the pool in more pain than I'd entered, drove home in the dark, and sat in my kitchen wondering if I was the most stubborn, stupid man in Allegheny County. I went back the next morning, and the one after that. Listen, I know where you are right now. Maybe you're sitting there with your own knees that sound like gravel in a bag every time you stand up. Maybe you went to your own doctor and left with your own list of things you can't do anymore. Maybe you've already started the pills, waiting for the pain to become manageable, waiting for your body to cooperate with the program they laid out for you. I know exactly where that is because I was there. What I left in the pinned comment below this video is not theory. It's the exact protocol I followed, week by week, for the first 2 years. The distances, the temperatures, the recovery windows, what to do when the pain increases before it decreases, because it will increase, that's a guarantee. Finish listening to me, then go down there. Swimming didn't heal me gently. It demolished me first. That's the part nobody tells you. The first 6 weeks were the worst 6 weeks of my life in terms of joint pain. Synovial fluid that had been nearly immobile for years was being forced to move, and that process creates inflammation before it creates relief. There are days you limp out of the pool worse than you limped in. The cold water of the early morning bites. There's nothing meditative about it. It's a 62-year-old man in a poorly lit community pool at 6 in the morning, fighting his own skeleton, with no certainty that he's doing something intelligent instead of accelerating his own destruction. What shifted everything was a conversation with a physical therapist named Earl, who I met at the pool. He coached master swimmers on weekday mornings and watched me for 3 sessions before he said anything. When he didn't waste my time. You're pushing too hard and you're doing it wrong at the same time. The water's resistance works for you, but the movement has to be controlled. Range of motion has to build incrementally, not all at once. He gave me 3 principles that changed everything. First, temperature is a tool, not a side effect. Warm water to mobilize, cold water to reduce inflammation after the effort. Second, speed is the enemy. 50 slow, deliberate yards are worth more than 200 forced yards. Third, daily consistency has no substitute. The body needs the daily signal that movement is permanent, not occasional. 3 days a week doesn't work. The musculoskeletal system responds to constant repetition, or it doesn't respond at all. I started swimming 45 minutes every single day, no exceptions. Humid Pittsburgh summers, gray November mornings where the walk to the car felt like the hardest part. Days Dorothy watched me from the kitchen window with that expression she gets when she's decided not to say what she's thinking. Days I doubted myself deeply. But the joint, any joint, responds to continuous stimulation in a way that no medication can replicate. Water distributes body weight in a way that gravity on land cannot. It provides resistance without destructive impact. It forces movement without punishing the tissue. Over time, synovial fluid begins to regenerate. Cartilage, which has no blood supply of its own, is nourished by diffusion, and diffusion only occurs through movement. When you stop moving a damaged joint, you literally starve it. By the end of the first year, I was walking downstairs without a handrail. By the end of the second, I'd driven to a Pirates game, parked 6 blocks from the stadium, walked there and back, stood for 7 innings, and didn't think about my knees once. I realized it on the drive home. Just sat there in the car processing that my body had done all of that without a single conversation with my pain receptors. Something fundamental had changed. Not through medication, not through luck or genetics or any kind of special circumstance, through water and stubbornness. Today at 75, I swim 800 yards every morning, not to prove something to anyone, because my body now requires it the way it requires breakfast. Last year, I helped Tyler move into his first apartment. He's 21 now. We carried a couch up 2 flights of stairs. The same kid who watched me announce a paper plate to the entire backyard. There was no movie moment sentimentality in it. It was applied physics. A body that was forced day after day to work in water until its joints forgot how it felt not to function. The water has no compassion. There's no comfort in the first months. There's no shortcut. But there's a result. And you feel it when you stand up from a chair without making any sound. When your grandson asks if you want to help and you say yes, without calculating what your body is going to bill you for it later. When you understand that your body, that system of bones and cartilage and tendons that worked hard its whole life, still has the capacity to reorganize itself. Not because you believed in something, but because you got in the water every single day and didn't get out until you'd swum. That's it. That's enough. That's the only thing that worked. What most people don't understand about joints is that they aren't machine parts that wear down and need replacing. They're living tissues that respond to stimuli. Articular cartilage has no blood supply of its own. It survives through diffusion, like a sponge absorbing nutrients from the synovial fluid that surrounds it. And synovial fluid only circulates, only renews itself when movement forces it to circulate. A knee in permanent rest is a knee being starved of nutrition. Not dramatically, not overnight, but slowly, progressively, and completely reversibly if you intervene before the structure degenerates past a certain threshold. I learned this the hardest way, by getting it wrong first. For the first 4 months, I swam with rage, like the water was the enemy, like speed was a sign of progress. I'd leave the pool exhausted, joints inflamed, telling myself I was doing well because I'd suffered. That's wrong, completely wrong. What builds joints isn't suffering. It's gentle, consistent repetition within a range of motion that grows incrementally. The inflammation from my early sessions wasn't a sign of progress. It was evidence that I was causing damage at the same time I was trying to heal. It was when Earl explained the difference between productive pain and counterproductive damage that my real progress began. Productive pain is the discomfort of a muscle being worked. It's specific, localized, stops when the movement stops. Counterproductive damage is inflammation that stays with you, that wakes up with you the next morning, that worsens with movement instead of improving. Learning to distinguish the two took months, but it was the most important distinction I made in my entire recovery. When you know the difference, you stop fearing movement and start deploying it with precision. The second year was completely different from the first, not because the water had changed, because I had changed. I started to feel the movement of the joints from the inside out in a way that only makes sense to someone who has been through the process. There was a different quality to the motion, a lubrication that hadn't existed before, a range of motion that had returned millimeter by millimeter over months of consistent work. That's not abstract, it's physical. You feel it when the synovial fluid is present again in the right way. The movement feels different, less like gears without oil, more like well-maintained machinery that was designed to last. There's one thing I never mention when I tell this story in casual conversation: the social cost. Dorothy was worried for the first several months. My kids thought I was being stubborn in a way that might make everything worse. My doctor, when I came back for a routine visit 6 months after throwing away the prescription, looked at my numbers with genuine confusion and asked what I was doing differently. When I told him I was swimming every day, he said that was good. He didn't say his initial assessment had failed me. He didn't say his approach had been insufficient. He just said it was good. I accepted that. I didn't need an admission of error. I needed the joints I have today. At 75, what impresses me most isn't the absence of pain. It's the recapture of autonomy. Autonomy is the right word. The ability to do things without first calculating whether the body is going to cooperate. To stand up from a chair without planning the movement. To walk without monitoring each step. Most people under 40 don't even notice they have that because they've never lost it. I lost it and rebuilt it. And because of that, I understand its value in a way that only someone who has lost it can fully understand. There's nothing mystical about the process. There's nothing special about me. There's water, daily movement, and a refusal to accept that the human body after 60 is inevitably an object in irreversible decay. It isn't. What you decide to do with it every day is what determines the trajectory. And the pool at 5 in the morning is literally the most important thing I do for myself.